All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to our show, Deep Data Dive. Um, this is episode one, unless we recall it later to episode zero, but you never know.
hmm
Today, we're going to talk about what is data. Um, I could probably say something, but I have a feeling that Lori might have like a better handle on a definition or an example.
Okay, so whenever I think of data, the easiest example I can think of is to have any sort of measurement that you record. And the simplest idea of maybe data that you encounter as a child is when you're a grown up measured your height on a door frame as you were growing. So imagine if you were on like your third birthday, your grown up would mark your height here, and then on your fourth birthday, they'd put you up against the same door frame and mark your height again, and so on and so forth throughout the years. And that's maybe the earliest example of data because you have a recorded observation and to top it off, it's also kind of repeated too. Not all data has to be repeated, but that's a really simple way of thinking about data is a recorded observation.
Yeah, yeah, really like that because I think what some people, including myself, would say that data is everything that's digital, but um, taking what you said about recorded observation, it gives it puts everything in context because data obviously existed well before 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think another thing that to consider is the way in which that data was recorded, going back to your example of the height, because like every minutia or variation that tells a story too.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely true that, people have been using data long before the digital revolution. If you think of some of the earliest epidemiological studies done, you had like the nurses' health study, or the British doctors' health study, which studied breast cancer in women and smoking in men, respectively. Those were around way before the current digital age, and the data that they recorded had to be done the old-fashioned way with pen and paper. If you were ever a participant in any of those studies and know that I'm wrong, please contact me and I will gladly allow myself to be corrected. So, you know, people have been recording observations since, I guess, not necessarily the beginning of time, but for as long as they could. Just the medium at which we do them has changed, and especially with the advent of like so many of our current technologies and with computing, the amount of data that we've been able to gather has just exploded over the last 20 years. Like if you think about maybe another example, Vijay, I know you once mentioned, was talking about, like number of steps tracked each day on a fitness device such as a Fitbit. So, this device will now track things such as how many steps I've taken, and maybe how many calories I've consumed, and maybe a few other metrics. And this was not possible, like 20 or 30 years ago because the technology that we had just didn't exist to create a device of this size and or even be able to record these observations. So because of all of our advancements in technology, the amount of data we've just been collecting has been just exploding. And with the advent of computing, we're also just storing it and it's become easier for us to access. What do you think about this, Vijay?
Yeah, those are. I mean, that's an excellent point about the exploding size of data, but taking a step back and talking about um, like the way the variations of recording it. I'm thinking about metadata because even with that, that tells a story as well. I think a simple example would be going back to that old house that does have those height markings, like do I take a picture? Do I look at a journal entry that was written about it? Um, do I interview you or your mom or somebody else about it? Or I think all those ways of capturing or looking at historic data or even cataloging data today, that's like an important aspect of metadata itself, and that data about data is pretty valuable as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to know things such as, like when this was recorded and slash or possibly, I guess, depending on the case, what device was this recorded on, if this was attached to a specific login or human, a couple of these other things.
Yeah. So do you want to jump into data science, because we're kind of almost there in terms of what we talked about so far?
Okay, so I mean, I guess going back to the idea of how does data relate to data science, I guess data science is, if you think about it, just sort of like the study of being able to take all this data, make sense of it. And I realize that's a really, really broad term and that can encompass so many things. But I'm trying to think of like the simplest way to connect data and data sciences, taking all of this huge amount of data, being able to come up with it at the other end, some sort of insight and be able to make sense of it. But also knowing that you now have this insight, being able to create an action based on this data.
Yeah, in terms of how to leverage data science, I agree with that. But I think um, on a higher level, I think data science is the collision of different things. One side of it is the recording of data, the statistical analysis, um, the math that does bleed into machine learning, which we'll talk a little bit later, but also the storing of data. And that has to go with what you said about the increasing frequency of and uses of data. And that ties into larger databases and operations that need to be done in parallel and quickly. And that ties into big data too. So so in other words, it's a marriage of both math and even hardware too, because with
Yeah.
Moore's law and the increase in computing power, that's like uh, pretty um, impressive, I think, even in the last 10 years, because in 2011, that's when Watson came into fruition, or mainstream rather, and I think that's when data science became pretty hot, and that's when a couple of well-known things came out, such as that Venn diagram, as well as that Harvard Business Review article,
Mm-hmm.
as well as I think it may have been 2013 or somewhere, but I remember there was this 150-page McKinsey report on what data science is going to be. This is how many jobs there's going to be. If I recall correctly, like in our current decade, the 2020s. And yeah, but with all that I just said, like, do you, uh, based on what you've seen and experienced so far, Laura, do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, going back and reading the Harvard Business Review article from 2012 and calling it the sexiest job of the 21st century, reading it now, almost a decade later, and looking back, it's definitely really, really interesting. And I think like some of the things that they have definitely said have come true. There's this whole idea of data science being the sexiest job in the 21st century. And I think there was another article that said like data is the new oil. And it definitely appears that, the number of jobs listings for data scientists have just basically exploded. And then at the same time, after the article, you start to see more and more programs training people in becoming data scientists, because when that article came out in 2012, there wasn't a formal pathway into data science like there kind of is today. Even today, I don't really know if you could say that there is a formal path into data science. But back then, data science as a discipline, like a formal discipline, wasn't yet a thing. And people came into data science because they were trained in other disciplines.
That's true. Definitely computer science, math. I think those were the main ones, and that's the interesting thing about data science because it can be applied to anything. So I think even going back to that Venn diagram, like one of the three circles was the domain knowledge,
Yeah.
and well, every company has a data problem, and then with the different academic disciplines, I think they all have a use for data science because you and I have each been in a couple different fields, and with the transition, it wasn't too much of a loss because there was a lot that carried over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like maybe just from switching, careers and lines of work thing, yeah, like maybe sometimes the domain knowledge didn't transfer, but the core transferable skills did. So maybe something like, the skills that I learned about, like wrangling data, some like basic supervised machine learning that I picked up in my like grad school and postdoc years definitely became really helpful when I started my first job as a data scientist, even though, the domain was different. I was now working in fintech instead of in public health. The same data problems still existed. Like you still had like this giant pile of data and you had to be able to know, what do you do with it? How do you get started? And it's maybe that process and like learning how to do that in grad school, which was really the most important skill because it allowed me to like kind of hit the ground running when I started my first job. And another thing that is really interesting, I guess, mentioning going back again to the Harvard Business Review article about data science being the sexiest job in the 21st century, was that it mentioned insight data science, which at the time was just starting up. And in 2019, I actually got to be one of their cohorts, and that was one of the things that helped me transition into data science. Unfortunately, Insight closed down due to the pandemic, and at some point, we're hoping that they will open back up again. So I guess it's really, really interesting thinking about it from the lens of Insight, where when the article was written, it was just starting up. By the time I had joined Insight, it become like a huge thing across multiple cities and different data disciplines to basically shutting down because of the pandemic and that short period of time when there was just nobody hiring for anything last year.
Yeah. Well, yeah, hopefully they'll open up. And I was going to say something else, but before I do say that, I mean, it's also worth noting that, I mean, I went to a master's program that was like one of the earlier ones that did start, I think, around a year after that article. And one of the interesting things that makes that program stand out at Stevens is that not only were there boot camps built in, but there was a big emphasis on keeping up to date with the different tech skills, like, for example, AWS, Spark, using IBM Watson, using Hadoop. And it's kind of interesting because there's always like a time difference between academia and industry. And this, especially with data science, it's still at its infancy, it's exploding. And the emergence of all these programs, as well as I remember that there was an office of data science, and there was a chief data scientist that President Obama appointed. So it became a very big, notable thing culturally pretty fast. But shifting gears a little bit, what we talked about so far about the schools, the jobs, that's how data science is being used today. That's how it's going to be used in the immediate future. And my thoughts, and possibly a question to you, Laura, is where do you see it becoming, and what do you think its full potential is to shape us as a society?
I mean, that's a good question. I want to say, I feel like, to quote one of the older Spider-Man movies, with great power comes great responsibility. I love that quote, but I think it's also really true. So, now that we have access to all this data, we have these powerful tools to derive new insights. We could always, use this power for good, or we could use this powerful, terrible things, such as what Cambridge Analytica did during the previous election and what Facebook might be doing to us today. So at the end of the day, data and data science are tools, and it's how we choose to use them is what I think will shape society. I know that's like a mildly cynical outlook, but it's possible to do a lot of terrible things with data if you're either not intending to, or maybe if you are intending to.
So, I mean, I have mixed feelings about it because at the end of the day, data science is a tool. It's used by people. And as you know, there's good people, there's bad people. But at the same time, I think data gives us a different way to communicate about facts and insights. And the thing with data is it doesn't have good data at least, it doesn't have a bias. It doesn't have emotion in it. It doesn't, well, unless it's sentiment analysis, but it doesn't have emotion in it. It doesn't have a gut feeling. And with that new possibility of objectivity, I think in the very long term, it might be a way to bring us all on the same page and possibly reshape some of our values. And in terms of using technology for good, or maybe hopefully having like a Star Trek society, I think data science could be one of the things that takes us there. And also, based on what I've heard physicist Michio Kaku say, it's possible that we could use like a digital footprint or a digital copy of ourselves, not only to be immortal, but to send these electromagnetic waves that travel at the speed of light, and we can explore the far corners of the galaxy and the universe because we have this unlimited time. And I think with data science, there's like, it opens the door to so many things that we can't see now. And I think there's always a possibility for good things in the far future.
Yeah, I really hope that is the case. I want us to be able to do things that are beneficial to humanity with data.
And I think that's one of the goals of the show, to get different guests coming on in the future, and we can share our own perspectives. And we may not have like a definitive or conclusive approach to everything. And with this changing field, today and tomorrow and the day after could be much different. But I think this would set us on the next step going forward and be a historic record about where data science could hopefully evolve into.
Yes, definitely. And I know I don't expect us to agree on everything because I'm pretty sure it would be impossible to get all the data scientists in the world, or even just 2 data scientists to agree on everything. But I think that's okay.
All right. Is there anything else that you would like to talk for this current episode, or should we save it for the next one?
I think we can save it for the next one. I hope that's
I'm
definitely
having trouble
covered.
connecting. I'll keep trying.
Sorry, that was my Alexa, which is not connected to my Amazon account. It generally likes to tell me that it's not connected. Anyway, I think that's enough for the first episode. And, I hope all of you listeners enjoy listening to this with us and, going on this deep data dive journey with us as we discuss many, many more topics related to data science.
All right. Thanks very much, Laura, and see you and everybody else in the next episode.
Yay.